All right, guys. So Ryan Walker here, Tanner, founder and co-founder of the Iron Guild, and what we want to talk about today is a little bit about our backgrounds into our training methodologies, everything that we've delved into. We won't go too extensive into that, but just kind of a brief overview, because we want to kind of share our insights of having been athletes most of our life, having dealt with biomechanical problems, little nagging injuries, and then forcing us to kind of delve into like the deeper science behind biomechanics and anatomy to kind of understand how we can resolve our issues. So I'll just really quickly go. I started out as a martial artist, really into like tumbling and tricking, if anybody knows what that is. A lot of repetitive movement patterns, a lot of rotating to one side, definitely created some like asymmetries as a result of that. Then found my way into a weight room when I was probably like 14 years old, fell in love with bodybuilding. To this day, still really love bodybuilding and just training for hypertrophy. Pretty much been a lifelong martial artist. But probably around mid 20s, I started to really deal with some rib-related issues, some QL pain, quadratus lumborum, if anybody knows what that is, kind of that lower back muscle. And that kind of forced me to have to slow down a little bit and figure out what was going on from a biomechanical perspective. Ultimately, started getting into a lot of soft tissue release work, became a licensed massage therapist, found a system called functional patterns, which Tanner will share his experience there. But that's kind of how we met each other on Instagram was, I saw one of his posts doing some functional patterns movements, and we connected over that. And then, thinking that functional patterns was the end all be all, ultimately ended up finding even deeper methodologies, which Tanner will get into, some of the methodologies he's playing with. So anyway, that's basically my athletic background, and I'll shoot it over to Tanner and he can explain his.
All right, man. That was good, dude. That was solid.
Thanks, man.
Of course. Yeah, so I really just started off as like a backyard kind of ninja, I didn't really do anything super professional or super what's the word? Like laid out. I very much would just go outside with my brother and we would just like throw random kicks and try to like jump and do flips and things like that. So that was really just kind of like self-taught at the beginning until I got a little older. And, I did like track and football and I did cheerleading for a little bit. And that's really kind of where I started my movement journey. But before that, I was just kind of like, a kid who enjoyed playing video games. I loved Assassin's Creed. I was into movement because of that game. And I just love the idea of being able to move my body in a way. But I was like a really anxiety ridden, and I was overweight. I was really sick, and so I couldn't really do that. So I fell in love with video games that allowed me to move in ways that I wanted to. That is until I got a little bit older, and I started to overcome some of my anxieties, and I started exercising more and doing sports and things like that. And it helped a ton. It wasn't what cured my problems, but it definitely was a good place to start. And so I started acrobatics and cheerleading. And then as I got older, I started getting more into what's it called? Circus. Sorry. Into circus stunts, and I did circus for a little bit. So I've kind of been around, did a couple different things, but like I said, I was very sick growing up, and so there were bouts in my life where I felt great and was super athletic and all that kind of stuff, and then other bouts where I'd have like panic attacks every night, just getting sick, getting constant injuries, acne, things like that really were a major dampener on my quality of life. As I got older, I just struggled so much with anxiety and social settings and things like that. And so this is kind of what got me into this work I do. But yeah, we got into functional patterns and the way I started was through personal training. I became a certified personal trainer. That was my calling. That I was like, oh, this is like what I want to do my whole life, yada, yada, yada. And I was huge into calisthenics. But then, as you say, you deal with problems and you just dive deeper into different methodologies and schools of thought. So I got into functional patterns, and that was awesome. I met a really great guy who mentored me, and he like taught me all different types of methodologies that wasn't just functional patterns. And and it was just like an amazing experience. And then, like Ryan said, I'm recently studying this new methodology that has helped me a ton. It's really been the only thing that's helped with my acne and my anxieties long term, and it's been more of a permanent fix. And I mean, it's completely restructured my face and the way that I hold myself in reality, and the way that my nervous system functions in totality. So it's been pretty incredible, and it goes very, very deep. So I'm excited to communicate as much as I can about this new methodology in this podcast.
Yeah, awesome, dude. So for those of you listening, if you go over to our men's self development group, the Iron Guild, over on the school platform, which we'll go ahead and provide a link to that. Tanner's actually uploaded a couple of courses on mewing and these methodologies he's talking about. Which let's go ahead and jump into that, because I have a little bit of an understanding into it. But it goes really deep, and it's probably like the deepest of methodologies that I've stumbled across. Like both Tanner and I have also studied a little bit of like PRI, Postural Restoration Institute, and
Yeah,
I used to think that stuff was like really deep, but then when you start getting into this stuff, it's like a whole new level. So if you could, because I really want to understand this for myself too,
mm-hmm.
is just kind of talking about like the deep midline, like what that is for people who are listening. Obviously, that doesn't make any sense to most people listening, but what the deep midline is and why, like, increasing the tone of the deep midline is so important.
Yeah, dude. So the deep front line is essentially the deepest part of ourselves, that are essentially the muscles that run along the spine, but then down to the foot, up to the head. It connects the tongue to the toes. It's extremely important in learning how to essentially temper these muscles and get them to have proper tensegrity through pressurization training, through mewing, things like that. Is, I mean, it can solve problems that you didn't even know you had, right? That's the thing about this kind of training. So another way we explain it is the midline, which the midline essentially is the middle of the body, which we can explain it as the deep front line, or we can explain it as the mind-body connection. It doesn't really matter how you want to look at it. All it is really just the way your body sends information to your mind or your brain, and the way that your brain then perceives it and sends it back to your body. So this is where we get into problems like anxiety and problems with mental health and things like that, because we try to isolate it as a mental issue, but it's not just a mental issue. Can that exist? 100%, but the whole body is working in as an ecosystem. It's coherent to itself, right? And everything around it. I'm affected by your energetic field. I'm affected, like there's a cat sitting next to me right now. I'm affected by her energetic field. She's affected by mine, right? So this is something I have to touch on. So it's kind of, it gets into aspects of energetics, and which can be more of a spiritual concept for people, but there's science behind it. Essentially, it's an electromagnetic field of electrified water, right? So, anyways, I won't get too deep into that. I kind of tend to get sidetracked.
For anybody listening, I recommend just doing a Google image search on deep frontline dissection, and you can see literally how the extensors of the toes are tied into the tongue. Like it's all one fascial line, which
Yeah,
I don't know about Tanner, but for me, what led me into this whole understanding the fascial line journey was the functional pattern system, which
100%.
really revolves around tensegrity and getting the respective fascial lines to co-contract. So if you look at, so a lot of people often think of like the bicep, like you do a bicep curl and the biceps moving in isolation, but it's not, right? Like everything is integrated through a series of fascial lines. And so I, especially with my background as a massage therapist, really got into the myofascial release work. And studying the deep front line really blew my mind, because they actually refer to the deep front line in the myofascial space as the trauma line,
Oh
where you
wow, I
actually
didn't know
hold.
that.
Yeah, yeah. It actually, that's where if you hear a lot about like the emotional somatic release work, which is a real thing, where people will go in and they'll release the psoas, which is part of the deep front line,
Yeah,
and people will just like burst into tears because they're holding on to some sort of fascial trauma there. In
yeah.
fact, there's a lot of trauma typically associated with the psoas, and so it's yeah, really interesting stuff. And if we could jump into the
Liver, bro.
next, like, yeah, it's wild. The
Liver
next thing I'd
line.
love to talk about is and this is where I start to get like kind of lost in this methodology, is the difference between like negative and positive pressures. So like you teach this in our mewing course. about that negative pressure, tongue
Hmm.
to the roof of the mouth, like while you're swallowing, and that's supposed to create like a negative pressure. But anyway, if you could like dive into that briefly for people to understand.
Yeah, so negative positive pressure is not a new concept. It's used in medical terminologies for different states of the body. Uh, Essentially, the Mueller and the Valsalva, right? The
Mhm.
Mueller technique is a negative pressure. It's a drawing in against a closed airway that creates contraction. So negative pressure is just compression. It's just contraction. It's what's occurring at every single second, at every single moment throughout your entire life through gravity and atmospheric pressure. So your ability to create a contraction is very important, right?
Mhm.
In medical terminology, they use the Mueller technique to test for obstructions in the airway and things like that. If somebody's choked or whatever's going on, right? So, um, yeah, so it kind of tests in medical. But again, this isn't for medical; we're health practitioners. So, for the
Mhm.
Mueller in our case, the reason why we use it is also to assess. It's also to evaluate. It's also to figure out sort of how someone's nervous system or autonomous nervous or what's the word? The
Autonomic.
autonomic nervous system is functioning properly, right? So if you're doing the Mueller, for instance, which you guys can all do it right now, you just need to plug your nose and then breathe in through that closed airway and try to hold that for 5 to 10 seconds and see how that feels. If you feel like you're panicking or you feel like you're getting some weird activations, like maybe your tension's all in your face, then it tells us a lot about what's going on in your body and a lot about how your autonomic nervous system is functioning. So that's negative pressure. Negative pressure, like I said, is essentially just a crushing. It's just what happens when you take a can and then you crush it, right? Positive
Mhm.
pressure, what that is it's an expansion. Think about having a Coke can or a sparkling water can or whatever you're thinking about, a water bottle, and you fill a thing full of air or water, right? Which really are kind of the same thing inside the body, sort of. It's just a pressure, right? It's blood and breath and blood, right? So when you have this in your body, you can resist being crushed. What happens with people is that they dry out. They dry out over time. Their tissues get dry. They have a lack of perceptual awareness in their bodies because of a lack of circulation, because of tense tissues, because of trauma, because of injury. But at the end of the day, is because they're not breathing properly to actually create buoyancy in their bodies that are going to relieve those tensions that are trying to hold them in space, right? So positive pressure is essentially this pressure that pushes against that atmospheric pressure, that gravity, right? You take a water bottle, like a plastic water bottle, you try to squeeze that when it's full of air, it ain't going nowhere, right? You see what I'm saying? So that's really all positive pressure is. It's just a engorgement of pressure inside your body that we need to regulate through the cranium, through the throat, in the chest, in the abdomen, in the pelvis, and even out to the outer extremities. So kind of back to the midline. The midline is about the centermost structure of your body that everything attaches to and movement originates from. So when you have wrist pain, elbow pain, shoulder pain, knee pain, whatever it is, essentially we need to learn how to create a pumping mechanism towards those, and then we create a pumping mechanism away from those. But it gets hard because we have excessive tension, again, because of trauma. And that's why, like you said, Ryan, when you are doing, actually, I didn't know this. I didn't know that body workers call it the trauma line, because when you release it, it's like where all the trauma is being held. It's because the midline always wants to guard itself first. So typically, if you see people that are walking kind of funky, or they just kind of move weird, like they have like weird movements to them, like they seem kind of like they're like a brick, right? They're
Mhm.
holding, they're guarding, because their midline is drawing all this blood and pressure back towards it, because it has a negligence of it, has a lack of it. So
Mhm.
yeah, somatic release is incredible because it has to do with breathing, which breathing is the function of the deep front line, which ultimately kind of is the midline in totality. It's essentially the spinal connection of the brain to the body, and how all the nerves run through the body and send information back to the brain. Anyways.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense when you said about guarding. It's like the first thing it wants to do is guard, because if you think about it, that's where all of your vital organs are kind of housed, is around that
100%.
deep front line. The attachments of the lungs, the heart attachments, the intestinal tract. It's all in the midline of the body. So your brain and your heart are your body's number one kind of focus in terms of survival. So that's why you'll
Yeah.
see people get cut and blood automatically shunts back to the heart away from the extremity. In EMT class, that's what we learned, right? Like for if somebody like severs an arm, it actually the blood will retract into the body as much as it can until ultimately you start losing blood pressure, starts dumping blood out of like an artery.
Yep.
So yeah, that's interesting when you say the guarding, that's the first thing that you're going to do is protect that midline. So I think that what I wanted to do is really delve into this so that way we
Mhm.
could take it full circle, because initially we talked about our backgrounds, how we ended up eventually running into like injuries, and then I remember you telling me about this methodology and talking about how you really can express movement however you want to if you have a strong foundation. So
Yeah.
like if you want to talk maybe a little bit about um, you know, pairing these negative and positive pressures and creating a healthy, deep front line, and then being able to move back into more of the conventional stuff that we once did, like the bodybuilding or, parkour, whatever it is, without having to worry about injury.
Yeah, dude, the body's adaptable. There's no one way the body moves. We've been lied to about how all you can do is just, walk and run and throw.
Hmm.
That is a foundation. We all should be able to stand, walk, run, and throw, but it doesn't mean it's all you should be able to do. And functional patterns also states this too. Like I'm not sending any hate. Like I like the company. Like I think it's great. Like I think that what they're doing is awesome. I think that some of their messages are a bit inaccurate, but it's a company, But at the end of the day, they got to make money. But yeah, when it comes down to the deeper concepts, we are meant to walk and breathe. Like that's sort of what we have to do. If we can't walk, we can't breathe. Our bodies are going to tense up. We're going to guard because we can't go get food, right? I'm not just talking about going to the kitchen. It's like your body thinks that it has to go hunt. You see what I'm saying? So even
Hmm.
just like minor problems with your body are going to create a guarding effect to your system. So it's all about learning how to regulate that nervous system to ensure that it knows that the lion isn't right around the corner, right? Even if you're just walking to the kitchen, right? Like for instance, you ever got up in the middle of the night when you're hungry or you got to go to the restroom or something, and you're in the dark and nothing's out there, but you're walking to the dark, and not only is there like a fear, but there's a guarding, right? You're
Hmm.
tense, you're looking around, you're like grabbing objects around you, because you can't see, but because you have a lack of sensory information coming in, and because your body is in like a high cortisol state. It needs sustenance, it needs resources. There's different ways that we can look at this and reference this, but fascia works in coherence with everything. Fascia, the way I view fascia is like dark matter, right? Dark matter is like essentially useless, right? Because it doesn't have any qualities to it. It's just the space between all things in reality, right? That's all it is. It's just like this thread that ties things together, but without it, nothing else would work. Do you kind of see what I'm
Hmm.
saying? It has no function, but
Right.
its function is to help others function. You see what I'm saying? And
Hmm.
so by sending signals, and by allowing signals to send, and by preventing signals to send, right? Cut your fucking thumb off, and you're like, your fascia is going to get pretty damn tense to try to prevent the event of those neurons and the nerves back to your brain as a pain signal, right? So when people talk about tension, and they talk about like massage or myofascial release or whatever, or they're talking about fascia and fascial training, really what fascia is not really like, people think it's like a way we move. And I mean, yes, that has a part of it, but it's an on or off. It's a compression or an expansion, right? It's
Hmm.
essentially an ability to harden ourselves for impact, for contraction, right? Or to open ourselves up for expansion. And so people's inability to create proper respiration is just excessive contraction and a lack of, or a deprivation of, proper expansion. So you can move however you want,
Hmm.
as long as you have an ability to go from tense and tense up your whole body and then relax it immediately. Most people can't do
Hmm.
that. They don't even know how to tense. They don't know what they're feeling in the first place, right? We all carry so much trauma. So yeah, is it important to move your body and do different movements? 100%. Like that's definitely, fascially oriented because your fascia is a major sensory organ. So you have to sense what's going on in the space around you. But again, you have to be able to sense it in the first place and turn off places and create blood circulation. You can't create blood circulation if you can't reduce tension. And you can't reduce tension if you can't breathe properly. If you feel like you're not safe. So you have to feel safe before you do anything else. You have to learn how to tolerate stress before you put stress on someone's body. And this is where a lot of coaches get wrong. It's not about just like throwing them into an exercise where it's like incredibly tough. You're like, get the core on, or extend your T-spine. What it's about is teaching the individual how to create stress tolerance. When they have stress tolerance and they can actually relax under that tension and perceive the stressors for what it really is, then everything begins to change from there. So that's my
That's what's so cool about like running biomechanics is
yeah.
it's basically an undulation of contraction and relaxation happening on different parts of the body simultaneously. It's like when your foot strikes the ground upon landing, there needs to be a stabilization, an absorption of force, and a stabilization
Yep.
around that. Meanwhile, other tissues in the body are relaxing and gathering elastic recoil potential to
Mm-hmm.
then launch into the next phase of the gait cycle. So it really is like exactly what you're saying. That's why I think running is such like a incredible
Ultimate.
movement practice.
The ultimate.
Yeah, because it's being able, and not only it's not only training you how to create tension and relaxation, but it's training you how to do that in a symmetrical fashion using all the entire body as like a tensegrity structure.
Yeah, dude. I actually remember I stopped sprinting for a while because I was like working on my biomechanics, right? Like quote unquote, you know what I'm saying? And
Mm-hmm.
I remember the first time I went back to sprinting, and I did like 3 sprints, like maybe like 100 feet, maybe like a typical 100 meter race or whatever, like the like typical yard or whatever. I don't know what it is,
Mm-hmm.
but
Right.
I did that and I got done. And I was like sick, dude. I felt sick afterwards. Not like I had to
Hmm.
throw up or like I had to go to like had diarrhea or whatever, but I just felt like ill, and I like had to sit down. And I was like, oh my god, like I feel like sick, and it was because I created like a lymph drainage. I like pumped
Hmm.
out all this crap in my body because movements like that, especially when your fascia is healthy because you have a regulated nervous system, even more so. Breathing and a movement, especially like sprinting, is a lymphatic drainage and a lymphatic movement. This is why
Hmm.
like all of us struggle with so much like sinus condition. It's because our cranial pressure's off, right? If our cranial pressure's off, we're not getting those micro movements in our craniums, right? Especially if our tongue is disconnected, we can't actually stimulate that soft palate to create that stimulation in the sinus cavity to create drainage in the first place. So there's a place for both. Like this is why I love functional patterns and why I love methodologies that have to do more with breath work and things like that. But they're in good coherence with each other. Like I think everyone should train functional movements, but it's not to say that they can't go and do other movements that they like really what matters is self-awareness. If I decide that I want to go do yoga, I'm like, hey, I feel like trying a yoga class, and I'm
Hmm.
going and I'm like stretching myself or whatever. It's not that it's wrong. It's just that if my body is not prepared for that, in the sense that my autonomic nervous system isn't regulated and my natural functions can't occur, then anything I do is going to hurt me. Anything. It doesn't matter if I'm walking down the street, and I roll my ankle because I have a lack of awareness, down there. My tensegrity's all fucked up because my right side is stiff, so my left side is not, right? It's
Hmm.
and it's not about like building stiffness in your left and stretching your right. It's about regulating your nervous system. So if I go stretch, I go stretch. And if I want to improve my flexibility, that is just a signal back to the brain to stop contracting that muscle as hard. So is that wrong? I mean, no, it just kind of depends on where your positioning is. If you're regulated and you just still happen to have like a lot of tension in a place, it's not wrong to stretch it or do a myofascial release, but you have to ask yourself why that tension's there in the first place. So yeah,
Hmm.
that's how it works. People just don't understand how it works.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, I wanted this to like kind of be like an introductory to or like kind of a deeper dive into the science behind why we're doing all this weird like like blowing up our cheeks and
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
making these sucky faces or whatever. If nobody knows what we're talking about, you guys
Uh-huh.
could go over to the community. Everything's free as right now as the community is going up. We will be switching into paid in the future, but right now for all the founding members, everything's totally free. So we got a ton of value over there. But I highly recommend you guys check out the Ember Core Awakening course that we
Copies.
just it's in the works. It's going to be up here pretty soon. We also have the Mewing course that Tanner has put up. What are we calling that again? The
Code of Contour, dude.
oh yeah, Code of Contour, right? Everything's medieval themed over there, so everything has
Yeah.
medieval era names. But I think what we'll do is wrap this one up, just so that way people can kind of chew on this information. But now they kind of
For
have a
sure.
little bit more of an understanding of the deep mechanics behind the reason we're doing those things, because it can
Yeah.
seem kind of arbitrary when you're doing them, and it almost seems like made up. Like, what is this made
Yeah.
up crap we're doing? But now that people understand negative positive pressure, the deep front line, and kind of its correlation to overall health and movement, I think this would be a good place to wrap up. And then we can always like do a
Yeah.
part two in the future if people want a little deeper dive.
Dude, 100%, man. Just ask the questions and I'll answer them like the best of my ability, you know?
Yeah, awesome, dude. All right, bro. Well, it's been great, man. And we look forward to putting out more content for you guys. Go join the community, the Iron Guild. There'll be a link available. And we look forward to seeing you guys on the other side.
Yes, sir. Peace out, guys.